What if I told you that there are books that were removed from the Bible that could change everything you believe? Throughout history, certain sacred texts were excluded, and many Christians don't even know they exist. But why? Who decided what should or shouldn't be part of Scripture? And most importantly, does this mean the Bible has been altered over time? In this video, we'll reveal what these forbidden books are and whether they truly change the message we know today. If you want to understand the truth hidden for centuries and discover if your faith may have been influenced, stay until the end. What you're about to see could change your perspective forever. The Apocryphal books are religious texts that, despite being ancient and significant, were not included in the official Bible. But what exactly defines a book as apocryphal? Simply put, they are writings that some Christian communities considered sacred, but were not accepted by the councils and religious authorities that established the biblical canon. These texts can be divided into two categories: the Old Testament Apocrypha and the New Testament Apocrypha. Among the most well-known are the Book of Enoch, which describes the fall of the rebel angels, the Gospel of Thomas, which contains teachings attributed to Jesus, but with a different approach than the canonical Gospels, and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which suggests a more central role for Mary Magdalene in the history of Christianity. Why were these books rejected? Some of the main reasons include contradictions with accepted texts, divergent philosophical influences, and decisions by religious leaders who determined which teachings should be preserved. However, many scholars argue that these texts offer a broader perspective on Christian history. But who exactly made these decisions? This brings us to the next point: how the Bible was formed and who chose which books would be included. The Bible as we know it today did not emerge fully formed. For centuries, different Christian communities used various sacred writings. It was only over time that the Church began to define which books would be officially accepted. But who made these decisions, and on what basis? The process of defining the biblical canon involved religious councils and ecclesiastical authorities. In the case of the Old Testament, the Jews had already established a collection of sacred scriptures. However, early Christians used both these texts and other writings considered inspired. As for the New Testament, the Gospels and apostolic letters circulated among Christian communities, but not all were universally accepted. The key moments for the formation of the canon occurred between the 3rd and 4th centuries. Councils such as the Council of Hippo, 393 AD, and the Council of Carthage, 397 AD, helped consolidate the list of accepted books. The criteria for this selection included apostolic authorship, doctrinal coherence, and acceptance by Christian churches around the world. However, this selection was not without controversy. Some Christian traditions adopted different canons. For example, the Catholic Church recognizes deuterocanonical books that are not in the Protestant Bible, such as the Book of Tobit and the Book of Judith. Meanwhile, Orthodox churches have additional books in their versions of the Bible. Given these differences, an intriguing question arises. If there were debates and changes in the formation of the Bible, to what extent can we be sure that its original message has been preserved? In the next chapter, we'll analyze whether the exclusion of the apocryphal books truly altered the content of the Christian faith. One of the main questions when discussing the apocryphal books is whether their exclusion significantly changed the message of the Bible. After all, if these texts were considered sacred by some Christian communities, did their removal alter the understanding of the Christian faith? Many scholars argue that the apocryphal books provide additional details, but do not necessarily contradict the core teachings of Scripture. For example, the Book of Enoch expands on the story of the fallen angels briefly mentioned in Genesis, but it doesn't change the central principles of Christianity. Similarly, the Gospel of Thomas contains teachings attributed to Jesus that emphasize self-knowledge but do not present direct contradictions with the canonical Gospels. However, there are books that could have shifted the traditional perspective of faith. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, for instance, suggests that Mary Magdalene had a more influential role among Jesus' followers than the official Gospels indicate. If this book had been included, the historical view of women's roles in Christianity might have been different. Another important point is that the exclusion of the apocryphal books helped create different versions of the Bible. The Catholic Church includes books like Maccabees and Wisdom, while the Protestant Bible considers them apocryphal. This means that Christians from different traditions read slightly different versions of Scripture. Regardless, the essence of the Christian faith, the message of salvation, the life and teachings of Jesus, has remained intact. But this raises another question. Are there even more hidden texts that could change our view of the Bible? In the next chapter, we'll explore the most recent discoveries about manuscripts and forbidden books that may reveal astonishing secrets about the history of Christianity. Throughout history, various manuscripts have been hidden, lost, or even destroyed for challenging the Church's official view. Some of these texts were only rediscovered in recent centuries, revealing information that could transform our understanding of the Christian faith and the formation of the Bible. One of the most impressive discoveries was the Dead Sea Scrolls, found in 1947. These texts, dating back over 2,000 years, include older versions of some biblical books and other writings that were never included in the official canon. What makes these manuscripts so intriguing is that they contain variations compared to the scriptures we know today. Does this prove that the Bible has changed over time? Another fascinating example is the Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in Egypt in 1945. This collection contains Gnostic Gospels that offer an alternative perspective on Jesus' teachings. The Gospel of Philip, for example, suggests that Jesus had a special relationship with Mary Magdalene, which is quite different from the traditional narrative. Meanwhile, the Gospel of Judas presents Judas not as a traitor, but as someone who played an essential role in the divine plan. Why were these texts rejected? Some scholars believe they were dangerous to the Church's power structure because they presented views that could challenge religious authority at the time. But do these banned books really prove that the Bible was intentionally altered? In the next chapter, we will analyze the documented changes in biblical texts over the centuries and whether these modifications were simple adjustments or attempts to control the religious narrative. The Bible we have today has undergone various translations, edits, and revisions throughout history. But to what extent were these changes merely linguistic adaptations? And to what extent did they alter the original message of the Scriptures? To understand this, we need to go back to the earliest copies of biblical texts. The original manuscripts of the Old and New Testaments no longer exist. What we have are copies made by scribes over the centuries. And here's a crucial detail. Scribes didn't just transcribe texts. They could also make mistakes, corrections, or even modify passages to align the Scriptures with certain doctrines. A classic example is the passage about the adulterous woman in John 8:1-11, where Jesus says, "Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone." Many scholars agree that this story was added later and was not part of the earliest manuscripts of the Gospel of John. If such an iconic passage was inserted later, how many others were modified? Another controversial case is Mark 16:9-20. The final part of this gospel, where Jesus appears resurrected and gives instructions to his disciples, does not exist in the oldest manuscripts. Does this mean someone may have added this passage later to reinforce the resurrection narrative? These examples show that, yes, the Bible has undergone changes. But does this mean its message has been corrupted? That is the big question. Some believe the changes were just natural adjustments in the transmission process, while others argue there was a clear intention to shape Christianity according to political and religious interests. And if manipulation did occur, what was the objective? In the next chapter, we will explore whether the exclusion of apocryphal books and changes to the Bible were made to control faith and information. If the Bible has changed throughout history, an inevitable question arises. Were these alterations merely human errors, or was there a deliberate intention to control faith and information? To answer this, we need to understand the historical context. For centuries, the Church played a central role in society, and religion was the foundation of political power. Whoever controlled the interpretation of the Bible also controlled how people thought, lived, and worshiped. This made defining the biblical canon and eliminating texts considered dangerous, important strategies for maintaining unity and church authority. The councils that decided which books would be part of the Bible took place during a period when the Church sought to solidify its doctrine and prevent internal divisions. Books that could lead to different interpretations of faith or give more autonomy to believers were rejected. A clear example of this is the Gnostic Gospels, which emphasized personal and direct knowledge of God without the need for intermediaries. Another indication of possible manipulation is how certain concepts were reinforced over time. Mary Magdalene's role, for example, seems to have been diminished to prevent the idea that women could hold spiritual leadership in early Christianity. However, in apocryphal texts, she is portrayed as one of Jesus's closest disciples. Moreover, some core Christian doctrines were established centuries after Jesus' time. The concept of the Trinity, for example, was only officially defined at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. This suggests that, in addition to preserving faith, the Church also shaped doctrine according to its needs at the time. But does this mean that the Bible we have today is unreliable? Or that the Christian faith has been manipulated to the point of losing its essence? In the next chapter, we will analyze to what extent these changes have affected the true message of the Bible and what this means for Christians today. After everything we've seen, one thing is clear. Over the centuries, the Bible has undergone changes, edits, and the exclusion of books that could have offered a different perspective on the Christian faith. But does this mean its message has been completely altered? Or is it possible that, despite these modifications, the essence of faith has remained intact? Regardless of the answer, what this teaches us is that we should always seek knowledge and question the history behind the texts that shape our beliefs. Many of the decisions that determined what is or isn't in the Bible were made by men in a specific historical and political context. This means there may be more to the Christian faith than what we have traditionally been taught. Now the question remains, what if there are still hidden texts that we don't yet know about, ones that could completely change what we believe? Is the truth only in what has been presented to us, or are there even deeper secrets about the history of Christianity? If you want to keep exploring the hidden mysteries of the Bible, and uncover truths that few people know, don't leave without subscribing to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos, and leave your comment below. Do you believe the Bible has been altered, or has its message been preserved? Your opinion is very important. See you in the next video.